Welcome back to The Ed Show. Today, Mitt Romney was asked about the criticism of his economic plan. Here's what he said.
I don't say much to critics. I put out 59 steps for how I'd get the economy going, and I don't think I've seen any from the president that show what he's planning on doing. I've laid out my 59 steps, and take a look at them. I think you'll find them very specific.
Wow, I got 59 problems, but an economy ain't one. Keep in mind that question was hardly out of left field. The most recent critics of Romney's so-called economic agenda have been conservatives who say Mitt Romney has not adequately articulated how he would fix the economy. These critics include the likes of, say, Rupert Murdoch and the editorial page of his paper, The Wall Street Journal, as well as conservative icon Bill Kristol. Evidently, they are nonplussed by Romney's 59-point plan, which he unveiled to little fanfare during the heated primary season. Today, Romney was indeed specific about what was included in those 59 points. He wants to expand domestic energy production, create new trade agreements with Latin America, and crack down on China, cut the corporate and the individual tax rate, and cut regulations. But Romney made a gross misstatement in saying he hadn't seen anything from President Obama. As our next guest noted today, the President's American Jobs Act has 41 points. It's actually far more specific than Romney's 59-point plan because the President's plan has been drafted as an actual piece of legislation. Of course, Republicans in Congress have no interest in passing it. Let's turn to Ezra Klein, MSNBC contributor and columnist for The Washington Post. Ezra, thanks for coming on.
Good evening, man.
Look, we'll get to President Obama's plan in a moment, but I'd like you to assess Mitt Romney's 59-point plan first. Specifically, does it do much for short-term economic growth as they've touted it?
No, it does not. So the 59-point plan is literally anything they could think of to put on there to get to a very, very high number. So they can say over and over again they got a 59-point plan. So, I mean, it's everything from repeal Obamacare, repeal Dodd-Frank, pass a balanced budget amendment, begin to pursue territorial tax codes, to very, very small things related to specific regulations. What it doesn't have is short-term economic support. So there is potentially an individual income tax side that came out much, much later. But there's nothing really serious on infrastructure. There's nothing about state and local jobs. You look at it, and it's not clear how it would get money into the economy now. Whatever you want to say about cracking down on China or signing a free trade agreement with Latin America, those things take time. They take years. And there's a reason Romney's had trouble here. Republicans have basically had the problem that Barack Obama took all of their ideas. And if Mitt Romney came out and said, we should pass a payroll tax cut that is twice as large as the current one, Obama will come out and say, well, why haven't you passed the American Jobs Act, which includes that? So they're slightly backed into a corner here.
Yeah, you wonder, since he was loath to say anything about it earlier, that is, Mr. Romney, whether he'd read his own tax plan. It reminds me of Charles Barkley saying, hey, I was misquoted in his own autobiography. So does Romney explain how he'll pay for all these new tax cuts without truly draconian spending cuts that would resemble Europe's most unsuccessful austerity measures? And we're seeing the blowback of those austerity measures today.
No, there's been no. Romney's tax plan would cost trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. It would cost an enormous amount of money. It's a very, very, very big tax cut. And by the way, he would pass it after extending every single Bush tax cut, which we already can't afford. So you've got trillions of Bush tax cuts, trillions of Romney tax cuts, and no offsets anywhere to pay for any of them. The only major spending cut he has identified is to Medicaid. He said he would do something called block granting it and then cap its growth at inflation plus 1%. What that would essentially mean is that you would cut Medicaid by about a third within a decade or so. I'd want to go back and check those numbers, but that is what I remember from last time I looked closely into that. That's been estimated by the Urban Institute to cut 14 to 19 million people, mostly poor people, off of Medicaid. And even that would not come anywhere near paying for his tax cut.
Yeah, that's pretty draconian, to say the least. You also wrote today that President Obama's plan is more geared toward an immediate increase in jobs in the short term. Help us understand what you meant by that.
Right. So when you take Romney's plan, I mentioned the free trade agreements. But what Obama's plan emphasizes are mainly four things. One, he would double the size of the payroll tax cut. Two, he would pass large tax cuts for both small businesses and businesses that hired new workers on the first $5 million of payroll. Three, he would do a very significant investment in immediate infrastructure improvement. And four, he would give a fair amount of money to state and local governments in order to hire back some of these 600,000 jobs they have cut in the last couple of years. So two of those proposals are essentially direct hiring, state and local and infrastructure. You're just giving people actual jobs. It is very clear that creates jobs right now. We know perfectly well that we can hire a teacher, and we have the capability to do that in this country. Number two are the tax cuts, and what we know is that they put money into the economy now. These are short-term tax cuts. They don't require large rewriting of the tax code, which takes time. They just move money, particularly on the payroll tax side, to people who need to spend it. Payroll tax cut is a progressive tax cut. And on the business side, to small businesses and hiring businesses, which are the two types that we're most interested in because they're by far the most cash-strapped, particularly on the small business side.
You know, what's impressive here, of course, in the academy, this is what we call thick description. Obama has given very nuanced interpretations and analyses of what's going on here. But how does his, how does his plan work to a public that knows Congress doesn't want to pass it? So how does he pitch that in a way that is effective to the public?
This has been their problem the entire time. What do you do when Congress won't pass any of your legislation? Mitch McConnell and John Boehner have been very smart on how they've played it, because in the end, the public begins to look at Obama. They say he's ineffective. It may be that his ideas are good, but he's not being able to get anything done. Why can't he show leadership, give a speech, do something? They are understandably frustrated, and they don't sit around wondering about congressional procedure and who's really got the power here. So Obama sells it, and so far he's a little bit ahead in the polls, but this has been all along the whole problem for them, and particularly since 2010. Everything Republicans say is that he's responsible for every bit of bad economic news we get since then, and yet his policy preferences are not the ones we have in place right now. If we had passed the American Jobs Act, you want to blame Obama for what has happened afterwards. I think that's perfectly fair. We have a policy equilibrium right now that is much closer to what Republicans actually wanted to do. We've not been able to move forward on things like further stimulus at all, and yet Obama takes the blame for it. It's a pretty sweet deal for them, frankly.
Yeah, it's the best of both worlds for them, and it's the worst for the rest of us. Ezra Klein, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, Cookiegate. Romney's mean-spirited remark is leaving a bitter aftertaste. The bakery backlash next. And the president is going on the offensive against Mitt Romney. Our panel will weigh in on the Obama political strategy. John Bramnick, Goldie Taylor, and Jimmy Williams will join me. Stay tuned.